kind of, yeah. And this was already kind of an indication that Korea was striving for globalization, which in certain resources was also called Americanization in South Korea, where speaking American English or having like American values would be kind of considered as valuable or giving you power. And as a theoretical framework, we built up upon the ideology, the terminology of ideology and the definition of David and Norton, which is dominant ways of thinking that organize and stabilize societies. And they also create certain ideas, people, and relations as privileged or as marginalized. And also because we're not looking at only one ideology, but we were discovering different types of ideologies, we decided to call it like the term as an ideological complex, which we defined as a common set of socially shared ideologies, which are connected among them and create some kind of a complex within the society. And part of the different types of ideologies that resurfaced through this research that you will probably see in more detail later on is the idea of neoliberalism, which was also previously mentioned, which is a form of capitalism that has become a critical influence over language and discourse in specific, especially in this community, like I mentioned. Also the idea of globalization, and for which we refer to the terminology, the description made by Appadurai, which is global cultural flows, where there are 5 types of interconnected, which Appadurai calls scapes, people, information, economic, political, and cultural systems that create these certain types of scapes. And also Confucianism, the ideology of Confucianism resurfaced through the research, which refers to the moral beliefs that emphasize strict hierarchy, gender roles, filial piety, and also importance of education. And there were certain teaching ideologies related to teaching practices that appeared slightly within the data. And to lead our research, we asked these questions, which were, we tried to discover the beliefs of foreign English language teachers in Korea, Korean English language teachers in Korea, and then how did they compare among each other, and what ideologies were represented in this findings overall. So the design of the study was a collective case study, and the data was collected through biodata questionnaires, narrative frames, asynchronous, online, and in-person interviews. Narrative frames, you might already know, but just to clarify, narrative frames are a type of sentence starters that kind of create a bigger picture. So we asked the teachers, like we gave them not questions, but like sentence starters that they could continue. And based on their narrative, we created interview questions, and the interviews were done asynchronous, online, or in person based on the participants' choices. And because of the COVID pandemic, because the research was done during the COVID pandemic, yeah. So in terms of the participants, we had 5 Korean participants. All of the participants were currently working in the private sector, although some of them had previous experience teaching in a public sector. So yeah, we had 5 Korean teachers, only 1 male. And we had 7 foreign teachers, again, only 2 male. So yeah. And all of them, again, were working in the private sector. Some few had a previous experience with public sectors. But in general, because although the teaching experiences may be similar, years living in Korea are different very different between foreign teachers and Korean teachers. Therefore, we assumed that Korean teachers may give a bit of a deeper more information about the Korean context in specific, rather than foreign teachers. However, as the previous research said, like all teachers bring their own ideologies that they have accumulated through lived experiences into their teaching practices. Therefore, foreign teachers would also bring certain ideologies that would affect their practices, and therefore we might discover something interesting in that regard. So to summarize the results of foreign teachers, so especially through the interviews, we discovered a lot of the insight from them. And the teachers mainly talked about globalization and the way they described globalization. So the ideology of globalization was kind of described through what they would say, like their students would are learning English because they want to go to a foreign country to study or to work. That would be one type of globalization. Oh, I can show you the quotes. So some examples of the globalization right here is some of the stories they would tell me would be kind of like funny, as they're going to a restaurant and they would have to translate the menu to their parents, and they would have to talk to the server, the person, to whatever they're doing on the vacation. So it's funny to imagine like my third graders checking into like a nice hotel and doing everything for their parents. This would be an idea of globalization as going into like a foreign country to travel, to, for a vacation. There's another idea of globalization, which is English is the global language, said by Maria. And here, then they would be able to get a job that would be able to either take them to another country or essentially take them to America. And this in specific, the last phrase also points at the idea of Americanization in South Korea, which was mentioned in some previous research. So some ideas of Confucianism. Most of my students started learning English because their parents made them go to an English academy. And also here, the idea that they are trying to help their parents when they travel, they want to translate the menu to their parents, they want to help their parents, they want to kind of make their parents feel good and show them that they know English. That's another way, I guess, of that points to the globalization, Confucianism, the ideology of Confucianism. There was also the ideology of neoliberalism. So one example is there's also a sense of like academic competition in Korea for young and older students too. So it's sort of like a positive feedback loop of academic pressure for the kids and the parents. So again, as you may already have experienced, that there's like a lot of academic pressure, all because the kids would want to go to a better university, to a better, get a better job, better paid job. And yeah, so the same is right here, to go to another country to get a job. And then there was also the idea of native speakerism that popped up, not as much here, but one of the foreign teachers mentioned like some are near native and it's easy, some struggle, although this is not a straight out like call of native speakerism, the ideology of native speakerism, but just the fact that the teacher was kind of comparing the students to native speakers kind of speaks a bit of the ideology of native speakerism. Yeah, and only a few teachers mentioned the ideology of monolingualism, saying that Korea is a very monolingual country. But mostly, like most teachers indicated the ideologies of multilingualism, which contradicts to that. But a lot of the teachers, although they understand that their students are not like the best speakers of English, perhaps, they are learning. They're learning English. Some of them are also learning other different languages like Chinese or Japanese, mainly because those are the closest countries. So some teachers would actually kind of acknowledge the fact that these Korean students are learning different languages. Therefore, the community is more multilingual. And there were also stories of the students of the teachers that would go to a coffee shop or go to a restaurant, and the owner would try to speak in English to them, like explaining the menu or something, although the person might have been living here for years and speaks perfect Korean, but just the fact that they come up to you and try to talk to you in English. And those kind of situations were actually acknowledged by some teachers. Yeah, and yeah, so this is the one interesting part. Fred here mentioned the ideology of medioscapes, I believe, one of globalization, global cultural flows mentioned by Padurai. So he mentioned that his students learn English through different types of media. So for example, I think Kate also mentioned a similar idea, that their students are learning English through watching YouTube channels, like writing comments on the YouTube videos and stuff, trying to communicate with each other. Fred also mentioned that they play video games and talk in English or learn English terminology through the video games, and that the ideology of globalization through medioscapes was also mentioned within the foreign teachers' narratives and interviews. To go into the Korean teachers' results, not as much information, not as much information about to bring out the ideologies was mentioned, perhaps because they were not very comfortable with the language or not very expressive in general. But I gave them the choice to either speak in English or have an interview in Korean, or have an interview which would be a mixture of the two. And only Samuel and Song, this last two participants, opted for the Korean interview. But the other three participants were had their interviews in English with a little bit of a mixture of Korean, where they wouldn't know how to express certain ideas and etc. So all of the Korean participants, all of them indicated ideas related to the ideology of neoliberalism. Most of them, I think maybe even all of them, mentioned that how they saw the Korean community as very monolingual, and therefore trying to learn other languages to get better, to become globalized or multilingual. And yeah, and also one participant mentioned the ideology of globalization and Confucianism, but mostly they talked about the neoliberalism, as you would see in the next slide with the examples. Yeah. So some of the ideas, some of the quotes here. So he said, especially big international companies such as Samsung or LG requires English. English is one of the qualifications they should have to apply for that kind of company. Whether they need it in the future or not, they're still asked to have certain types of qualifications, and English, having a good English competence is really big kind of weapon for them later. That's a quote from he. And there's another here, which was translated from Korean. The bottom parts are translated from Korean. The parents and students tend to think that life is successful only when you go to a university close to Seoul or in Seoul. Even if it is really a bad school, they think it is a good school if it is located near Seoul, says Samuel. And English for most of my students is for their exam, says Song. Again, all of these ideas indicate how English is a very important part of getting not as much in practice as it is on like a qualification as a score in your profile when you go into a better school, when you apply for a bigger school or a bigger company. And just the fact that the first participant here calls international companies and then gives an examples of huge Korean companies was a little bit different, that I will shortly discuss in a little bit. There was also the idea of Confucianism which says parents want their kids to study the grammar. So again, a lot of the, not only this one, but a lot of the participants in general, Korean and foreign, mentioned how parents would send their kids to English academies, would want their kids to get better scores, would want their kids to learn grammar, and how they would apply for them saying like, my kid needs grammar, so please teach my kid a grammar lesson. Also, there was the idea of multilingualism, which says when they meet a foreigner, they want to speak in English freely, naturally. This goes in line with the certain ideas about multilingualism that were discovered through the foreign teachers' narratives. And also a little bit of teaching ideologies was discovered through the narrative of Song. The target proficiency of most of my students is grammar and reading comprehension. Again, right up here, they also mentioned grammar. So a lot of the Korean teachers see their students' needs as grammar lessons, I suppose. So that uncovers a little bit of the teaching ideologies. So to talk about the similarities and differences across the groups of foreign teachers and Korean teachers, the similarities include the ideologies of neoliberalism, Confucianism, and globalization as travel. So all of the all or most of the Korean and foreign teachers mentioned how English is a tool to get into a better school, better university, better job, better paid job. And the ideas that I just mentioned of Confucianism, where kids are not always, and I think Kay especially mentioned this, that kids don't always have the choice of attending or not attending an English language academy. Either they like it or not, their parents just send them over. And Kay mentioned that it would be a lot better if the kids would actually have a choice and kind of study more the areas that they would like to study, but that's not always the case. So again, they have to go through their parents' choices in this regard a lot of the times. And then the idea of globalization in terms of travel, like a lot of participants mentioned how English is a necessary language to go abroad, is a tool to communicate with foreigners, to travel abroad on your vacations and stuff like that. Some of the differences were, so the ideology of globalization again, but in regard to education and employment. So foreign teachers, whenever they would mention that their kids would want to go into study in a better school or get a better job, they would always mention something about going to study abroad or getting a job abroad, or essentially getting a job in America. Whereas Korean teachers said completely the opposite. Like Korean teachers mentioned that the students want to go to the universities, to higher ranked universities, within South Korea, hopefully in Seoul or nearby Seoul, and to get an employment in like big, huge Korean companies like Samsung, LG, or SK, and etc. And also a few of the differences were the ideologies of monolingualism and multilingualism. Although within like foreign teachers, I think Maria was kind of mentioning that South Korea is a very monolingual country, and within the Korean teachers, I think EY mentioned that Korea is becoming multilingual. People would want to go out and talk to foreigners in English, but still, in general, most of the foreign teachers believed or saw Korea as multilingual or becoming multilingual society, whereas Koreans, most of the Korean teachers saw this society as a very monolingual society, and therefore trying to learn English, trying to become more globalized. Yeah, and these were the ideological representations that were discovered through the research. So the ideologies of neoliberalism, which were represented through the competitive education and employment, commodifications of English language, dynamic and transformative forms of capital. So English language bringing in capital, be it a social capital, be it certain types of cultural capital, and essentially economic capital. And the ideology of globalization, where English is described as a universal global medium of communication, students are viewed as ethnoscapes that either travel abroad or go abroad to study, and which use mediascapes and technoscapes to learn the language. Also, the ideology of Confucianism, where hierarchical values in familial structures were noticed, filial piety, or the importance of education. And finally, a little bit of teaching ideologies, which were presented through the ideas of monolingualism within classroom practices, grammar, and reading comprehension focused classroom practices. These parts were mainly mentioned by Korean English language teachers, Korean participants. Yeah. And the implications include that in this specific case, the teachers going through like their narratives, thinking through their classroom practices, would become more aware of their classroom practices. Therefore, hopefully, they would kind of reflect on that and improve their classroom practices in general. And to dream a little big, teacher training, I believe teacher trainings should include this type of ideas regarding English language ideologies within the Korean societies. So let's say for either pre or in-service teachers, where the teachers would actually be aware of what do their students learn English for, what do they need it for. And finally, hopefully, it could improve the national curriculum. In a lot of the research, especially regarding the ideas of neoliberalism, parents, the private academies have grown so much because parents do not trust the public education system and want their kids to excel in the competition to get into a better school or into a better job. And therefore, they just keep sending them to private academies. And instead, the national curriculum developers should kind of reflect on what exactly do they need. If they need a grammar lesson, add more grammar lessons, or if they need a specific lesson to prepare for the English SAT, they perhaps could add that into the public education system on top of regular English classes, and etc. Yeah, if you have any questions, this is the end of my research. Thank you, our research.
Okay, so I don't think we have any time for questions, but is there a way that if anyone had a question, they could contact you afterwards?
Yes. Here's our email addresses if you need.
Good. Okay, thank you for your presentation, everybody. A round of applause. You can do this either by unmuting your mic or by using the icon, but.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So now there's 2 minutes before the next session starts. So you're free to leave this Zoom room and go to the next session you'd like to attend. But yeah, thank you for coming to the presentation. Mike, do you want me to leave the Zoom room open so you can have a discussion?
No, it's okay. I can talk to Altyn using other means. It's okay.
Okay, all right. In that case, I will close the room.
Thank you, John.
No problem. Thank you for your presentation.